Have you ever had a dream so vivid it refused to let you go? What if sleep wasn't the escape you thought it was, but a trap? A realm where doors appear, but waking becomes impossible. Welcome, wanderer, to EchoVerse Whispers. You've just stepped into something you may never leave behind. Tonight, we begin a journey, not through nightmares, but through something stranger, softer, and much more dangerous. Close your eyes and ask yourself, what if the place you dream of is more real than the one you wake in? And what if something or someone doesn't want you to come back? I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. It started one night in early autumn when the air in my room turned unnaturally still, and the ticking of my clock melted into silence as if time itself had hesitated for a moment. I had drifted off like I always did, lying on my side, eyes fluttering shut to the sound of rustling leaves outside my window. But the moment my consciousness slipped beneath the veil of sleep, I found myself standing barefoot in a long hallway, the walls smooth and pale like polished bone, with no visible source of light, yet everything aglow in a soft gray hue. The floor felt warm beneath my feet, like sun-heated stone, and the only sound was the distant creak of something shifting slowly. Patiently, I should have been frightened, but there was a calmness around me, as though my body recognized the place, even if my mind screamed this was all wrong. I walked, slowly, watching as the corridor curved gently left, then right, turning in on itself in a spiral that didn't make sense, and the further I went, the more the space stretched and warped, like it was breathing. Then I saw it, a door, impossibly tall, its surface a shimmering black, that didn't reflect light, but seemed to absorb it, as though staring into it might pull your thoughts in like a whirlpool. My hand rose on its own, and as my fingers brushed the surface, the air turned thick, syrupy, the floor beneath me softened like flesh, and a deep thrum vibrated through the walls like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. The door creaked open, with a sighing sound that echoed like a memory, revealing a room that looked like my childhood bedroom, but dim and slightly wrong. The wallpaper faded in ways I didn't remember, the bed smaller, the corners darker, and the stuffed animals slumped on the shelves seemed to watch me, eyes glinting in a way that suggested awareness. I stepped inside because I couldn't not, and the door shut behind me with a whisper like someone exhaling their last breath. That's when I realized something was missing. There was no feeling of waking, no subtle pull of reality trying to reclaim me like dreams usually allow. Instead, it was like I'd passed into a space without exits, a loop where time curled around itself like a snake devouring its tail. I lay down on the bed, unsure if it would still hold me, and the moment my head touched the pillow, I was falling again, not down but inward, into deeper and deeper layers of dreams, stacked on one another like folded paper, each more vivid, more detailed, more personal. I saw people I hadn't thought about in years, places I only visited once in childhood, smells that triggered emotions I couldn't name. But nothing was quite right. Faces were too symmetrical, voices had an echo like they came from tunnels behind walls, and no matter how many times I told myself it was a dream, the world responded as though it heard me, reshaping around my thoughts like it was alive. At some point I tried to force myself awake, pressing my fingernails into my palms, screaming in my mind, counting backward from 100, all the tricks I'd used in lucid dreaming before, but nothing worked. Instead, I'd find another door, open it, and be somewhere else, always stranger, always deeper. I opened one door and was back in my high school auditorium, empty. Except for a version of myself, sitting in the front row, staring up at the stage where no one stood. I opened another and found myself standing in a city where everyone wore masks. Blank and smooth, their bodies frozen mid-step, as though caught in the middle of a story that had paused without warning. I called out to them, but my voice came out in whispers, like it was being filtered through cotton. When I touched one of them, their skin felt cold, like wax, and their eyes followed me as I moved, even though the rest of them remained still. I ran then, door to door, dream to dream, and each was a new scene, a new distortion, my mind tearing itself apart, trying to hold on to what was real. The worst was when I found the door that led back to my apartment tore, at least something trying to be my apartment. The layout was the same, but everything was off by degrees, the couch slightly smaller, the window showing a sky the color of bruises. And worst of all, someone was in my bed, under the covers, breathing slowly, rhythmically. And I knew, deep in my gut, that if I pulled the covers back, I would see my own face sleeping there. Or worse, not mine at all, something else wearing my skin. I backed away, the air in the room thick like old honey, and stumbled into another door that hadn't been there before, and through it, the dream shifted again. I stopped trying to wake up after that, not because I'd accepted my fate, but because the concept of waking began to fade, like something I'd imagined once a long time ago and forgotten, like trying to recall the name of a song you heard as a child. I started keeping track of the doors, how many, what they looked like, where they led, but the rules changed constantly. One night a red door led to a carnival drenched in fog, all the rides moving slowly without power, laughter echoing from nowhere. And another night the same red door opened into a vast, empty ocean under a lavender sky. The water solid enough to walk on. The sky humming like it had a voice I couldn't understand. I started hearing whispers behind the doors before opening them, voices saying things like, "He's almost ready," or "Don't tell him yet, or this time he'll remember." And once I heard my own voice repeating my name over and over, like a chant or a warning. The deeper I went, the more I forgot what sleep was supposed to feel like. No dreams of flying or falling. No waking with a jolt of relief, only this endless sequence of doors, each one showing me another layer of myself, or something pretending to be. And every time I tried to recall how long I'd been here, I couldn't tell if it had been hours or years. The dreams had consumed time like fire consumes oxygen, leaving behind only a hollow heat. I realized then that the door I found wasn't a metaphor, or a passage to another dream. It was a keyhole, turned inside out. Something ancient and curious watching me from the other side, and now that I'd opened it, I wasn't just dreaming, I was being watched, guided, tested. And whatever lay at the end of this labyrinth of doors wasn't rest or waking, but something waiting to be born through me, or maybe into me. And even as I try to remember who I was before that first night, before the hallway and the bone walls and the door that breathed like a living thing, all I hear is the same whisper behind every door. He opened it now, he belongs to us. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. I don't remember exactly when the dream started, only that I was already walking when I became aware I was dreaming, bare feet padding against a cold, endless hallway that pulsed with an unnatural blue light, humming faintly like a song too old for any voice to carry. The floor was tiled in intricate black and white spirals that moved when I looked away, and the walls were impossibly tall, disappearing into a dark haze far above me, lined with doors, so many doors. So many doors, each one a little different from the last, some wooden, others metal, some ornate and gilded, others scratched and rusted, some breathing as if alive. I kept walking because something inside me urged me forward. A presence behind the dream that whispered promises of truth and escape if I only kept going, kept searching, and my body obeyed. Without question. I passed doors that moaned or shuddered or clicked behind me, until I found one that didn't look like the others. It was made of a deep red wood, nearly black, pulsing gently like a heart. And though my dream self knew fear, my hand rose and pressed against it, warm and vibrating beneath my fingers. And the moment I pushed it open, the world changed. The hallway vanished, the air folded inward like paper burning from the edges. And I fell not down, but inward, tumbling through flickering snapshots of memories that weren't mine. A child with eyes sewn shut, whispering in a language I didn't know. A house suspended in the sky by chains that stretched into space. A man with no skin, smiling without lips. And I landed hard in a field of glass that stretched to every horizon, under a sky with no sun but a light that screamed. I stood, uncut but trembling, and ahead of me rose a staircase with no beginning, just hovering in the air, spiraling up into nothing, and though I didn't want to, my feet moved again. Up I went, step after step, until I reached another door, plain white, like a hospital room, and when I opened it, I was back in my bedroom, lying in bed. Relief washed over me until I noticed the time. 3:03 a.m. The same time I always woke from nightmares. But something was wrong. The shadows in my room didn't match the shapes of my furniture, and my phone screen was blank even when I tapped it. I called out, but my voice felt swallowed by thick cotton. I stood and walked to the mirror and saw myself standing perfectly still, staring back, but I hadn't stopped moving. My reflection smiled when I didn't. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and turned toward the hallway. But where my bedroom door should have been, there was only the red door again, pulsing. I ran to the window and yanked open the curtain, but instead of the street outside, I saw the hallway of doors, now wrapped around the outside of my house, like a prison wall. I wasn't awake. I was still dreaming. Panicked, I opened the red door again, desperate to break the loop, and once more I fell. Through visions more vivid and cruel than before, mother pulling worms from her mouth, as her child clapped, an ocean that whispered the names of the dead, hands growing from the ceiling to cradle a screaming man. I landed this time in a long, dim train car, with fogged windows and no seats, but dozens of people standing silently, facing away. I pushed through them, calling out, but they didn't move, didn't even breathe, and I reached the conductor's booth, at the end, to find a mirror, where the controls should have been. My reflection wasn't mine, anymore. It was gaunt, rotted, its mouth sewn shut, eyes wild, pointing behind me, and when I turned, the people were facing me now, all with my face. I screamed, but no sound came. I backed through the mirror and crashed into a chair in a quiet, candlelit room, with walls that breathed slowly in and out. An old woman sat in the corner, weaving thread into the air, each line creating a new door in the space around us. I begged her to help me wake up. She looked at me and said, "You walked too far, child. The dream is awake now, and it remembers you." I lunged for one of the doors and flung it open, but instead of escape, I saw myself, asleep in my bed, screaming with eyes wide open. I stepped through, into my body, but nothing changed. I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped, a prisoner. Inside myself, I watched the red door fade into my bedroom wall and realized no one would believe me. I was still in the dream. I hadn't escaped. And worst of all, now the dream knew I was aware and it wasn't done with me yet. I found a door in my dreams and now I can't wake up. The sensation of being trapped in my own body was worse than any nightmare I'd ever had, because it wasn't just fear, it was a cold, calculating paralysis, as if the dream had found a way to embed itself into the folds of my waking brain, whispering from the recesses of my consciousness, like mold growing behind a wall. I could see my ceiling, my room bathed in a dull gray light, unmoving, unchanging. And my limbs wouldn't respond, no matter how hard I screamed in my mind. No matter how I fought the invisible ropes that bound me to the mattress, and the worst part was, the silence. It was not the absence of noise but a suppression. Like the dream had reached into reality and turned the volume down on life itself. Even the ticking of my clock erased. And I waited, unable to blink, to cry, to scream. And then I heard it. A soft knock. 5 times, coming from my closet door, slow and deliberate. As if testing to see if I was truly awake. I couldn't turn my head, but my eyes burned with the effort of trying, and I felt something move within the silence. The way a ripple disturbs the surface of still water, and the door creaked open. I saw the edge of something long and black unfurl into the room like a shadow given weight, crawling low across the floor, sniffing at the air like it could taste my panic, and it stopped right at the foot of my bed. I felt the weight of its presence, ancient and wrong, like it had existed long before humans ever dreamed. Then it spoke not aloud, but directly into my head, its voice like teeth grinding in bone dust. You let me in. The pressure in my chest intensified, and I felt like I was being hollowed out, scooped clean like a shell. My vision blurred, and in that moment, the walls of my room peeled away like theater curtains, revealing the hallway of doors once more, endless, stretching into a darkness that pulsed with low, rhythmic breathing. This time, I was standing in it, not falling, not waking, but present, lucid, as if I had finally crossed some barrier that separated dreams from their makers. The doors shimmered as I passed them, each one whispering pieces of forgotten memories, tempting me to open them, and I knew instinctively that each contained a different version of my life. Fragments of choices I never made, paths I never took. I tried to look away, but one door stopped me. Cold, a hospital door marked 307, old and smeared with red handprints. Something about it felt personal, like grief given shape, and my hand reached for it before I could stop myself. The moment I touched it, the door dissolved and pulled me through like a vacuum, and I found myself standing in a hospital hallway with flickering lights, the smell of antiseptic and blood thick in the air. The intercom hissed static, and behind me, I heard crying, my mother's voice, young, ragged with despair. I turned the corner and saw her sitting beside a hospital bed, her face buried in her hands. In the bed was me, much younger, pale and unmoving, tubes running from my arms. I staggered backward, trying to understand. And then a nurse passed through me like smoke, her face expressionless, holding a clipboard with my name and a time marked 3:03 a.m. I watched as my mother looked up and whispered, "He won't wake up." The moment she said it, everything froze. The lights dimmed, The intercom screamed, and from under the hospital bed, the red door began to emerge, crawling upward like a blister forming on reality. I backed away, but the door burst open, and 1,000 shadowy arms reached out, pulling me in. I fell again, but this time I wasn't alone. I felt the weight of something holding on, crawling inside me, stitching itself to my thoughts. I landed in a forest of hands, branches made of fingers, trunks of pulsing veins, and the moon above was a closed eye that occasionally twitched. A figure stood in the clearing, draped in robes of stitched eyelids, holding a lantern that burned. With darkness, "You've breached the nest," it said, without moving its lips. "Now the nest will birth itself inside you." I tried to run, but the ground turned soft and hungry, pulling at my legs, and as I struggled, the lantern light poured over me, revealing that my skin was covered in writing dreams, fears, moments from my life etched into my flesh like scripture. The robed figure reached out and tore a strip from my arm, and I screamed as it unraveled, revealing not blood, but a tunnel of endless staircases leading down, down, down. The figure stepped inside the wound and vanished, and I fell to my knees. Trembling, my body pulsing with voices I couldn't silence. I begged the dream to let me go, to let me wake up. But the trees only swayed and whispered, "You're not dreaming, you're remembering." That's when I understood. I had never truly woken up. That moment I thought I'd escaped, back in my bed, was another layer of the dream, a trick, a deeper loop. I was still inside. Every time I thought I'd returned, the dream had only reshaped itself to keep me there, feeding on my mind, rewriting my memories, locking the real world behind more and more impossible doors. I stood, my legs trembling, and looked toward the horizon, where another door waited, this one made of mirrors, reflecting every version of me that had entered this place. They stared back, some screaming, some laughing, some completely blank. I walked forward, heart pounding, knowing that to enter meant risking the last of my sanity, but what choice did I have? Behind me, the forest groaned, the sky split open. And I heard the voice again, the one that had spoken from beneath my bedcloser now, inside my bones, "Come deeper. I'll show you how to leave." I stepped through the mirror door, and it shattered around me, the shards hanging in the air, showing flashes of other dreamers, other prisoners, all trapped, all watching. And suddenly I was in a room, with no walls, no floor, no ceiling, just a vast, endless white space, where my thoughts echoed as sound, my fears forming shapes, my regrets appearing as flickering specters that reached for me. In the center was a chair, and on it sat myself for what I would become if I stayed. Hollow-eyed, mouth stitched, hands red with ink. It looked up, and in my own voice, it whispered, "You found the door. Now you belong to it." I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. The words sank into me like needles dipped in cold mercury. And I stood frozen in that vast white void as my stitched-mouthed self tilted its head, its empty eyes gazing with a hunger I couldn't comprehend, and when it rose from the chair, I felt the room shrink, though nothing moved, the infinite space collapsing inward with a pressure that made my teeth rattle and my vision blur, and my double extended a trembling hand toward me, its skin flaking away in black ash that dissolved before it reached the floor. And I knew without question that if it touched me, I would vanish into that body, become it. And the dream would replace me in whatever world it had kept locked away behind layers of illusion. So I turned and ran, not with my feet but with my thoughts, pushing myself through that impossible expanse with pure will. And the whiteness bled away into a hallway so narrow it pressed against my shoulders, the walls made of faces, some weeping, some screaming, some silent and watching, stretched like canvas over bone. And the corridor pulsed with a heartbeat rhythm that didn't match mine, louder with each step I took until I could barely hear my own breathing. And the floor beneath me was soft and warm, slick like the inside of a throat, and with every step, it shuddered as if recoiling from my presence, or worse, welcoming it. Ahead, a door waited, shaped like an eye, its pupil a twisting keyhole. And I realized I had no key, but as I raised my hand, my fingers split open along the seams, revealing tiny silver teeth gnashing softly, and they began to chew themselves into a Shepa key, made of my own blood and bone. And when I pressed it into the lock, the eye blinked, the door screamed, and I fell through, once again. This time, I landed in a house that should have been mine, but everything was subtly wrong. Pictures on the wall showed moments that never happened. Family members with blank faces, furniture placed in reversed symmetry, and a TV playing static, mixed with my own voice whispering secrets I'd never said aloud. And as I wandered from room to room, the house warped, stretched, tightened around me, doors disappearing as I passed them, until I found myself in a nursery with a crib that rocked itself, and inside was something swaddled in blankets that moved in ways a baby shouldn't, jerking and twisting as if resisting the shape it had been forced into, and a mobile spun above it, each dangling piece a different door I had passed in the dream, all spinning slowly in unison as the thing in the crib began to coo in a voice that mimicked my childhood, saying, "Don't leave me here again." I backed away and turned to run, but the room was gone, the floor replaced with endless stairs spiraling downward, and with no other option, I descended, each step echoing with sounds that weren't mine. Conversations I'd never had, regrets I never voiced, arguments from strangers, layered like hundreds of radio stations bleeding into one another. And when I finally reached the bottom, I emerged into a cathedral made entirely of doors, each one set in stained glass that showed moving images of dreamers like me, people asleep in their own beds, their eyes open and glowing, whispering into darkness, all connected by threads of silver that wove through the air like spider silk. And in the center of the cathedral stood a tree made of knotted limbs, every branch ending in a key made of bone. And beneath it sat the same old woman from before, weaving, her fingers now elongated into spindles, her eyes black pits swirling with galaxies, and she looked up and said, "The door has chosen you to carry it." I asked what that meant, and she didn't answer but pointed toward the base of the tree, where a trapdoor pulsed, bleeding light through the cracks, and as I approached, the whispers grew louder, and I realized they were all versions of myself, trapped in other layers, screaming for freedom, each voice a record of failure. When I opened the trapdoor, I was pulled down violently, not by gravity but by memories I didn't want to face, times I'd lied, moments of cruelty, guilt, shame. Every weakness I had wrapped around me like chains as I plunged into a darkness so deep it swallowed even thought. And then silence. Absolute. Unbearable. Until I saw her, my sister. Dead 10 years now. Standing in front of me in the clothes she wore the day she drowned. Her skin pale and pruned, eyes calm but distant. And she reached out and touched my face, whispering, "It's not your fault. before disintegrating into a cloud of moths that filled the void and carried me upward through the dark. Each wing beat creating a new door that fluttered open for just a moment, revealing flashes of lives that could have been me as a doctor, as a criminal, as a child who never grew up, and I landed in a room full of clocks, all stuck at 3:03, ticking quietly in reverse. A mirror stood at the far end, and in it I saw myself, older, worn, eyes glowing faintly red, standing beside the red door, which was now inside my chest, its outline visible beneath my skin, pulsing slowly. I reached out to the mirror and touched it, and it melted around my hand, pulling me through into a version of my bedroom, where the walls were covered in writing pages from my dreams, scrawled in charcoal and blood, every inch filled with names, symbols, warnings in languages I almost understood. I heard footsteps behind me, and turned to see a man in a plague mask, tall and still, watching me silently. He held out a scroll, which unrolled itself to reveal only 2 words. "Stay awake," I asked why, and he pointed to the window, where I saw dozens of shadows pacing back and forth, all variations of me, all knocking on the glass, 5 times each. In perfect unison, I realized they were the ones who had fallen too deep, lost themselves to the dream, and now wandered its corridors, looking for cracks in reality to slip through. I looked back at the man, but he was gone, and the scroll had turned to ash in my hands. Then I heard the knocking from inside the room, 5 times on the closet door. It had followed me. I backed away, but the floor gave out, and I was falling again. Always falling, through layers of self, each more distorted, until I screamed, and this time, I opened my eyes and I was back in bed. But something was wrong. My body felt heavy. Stiff, not like sleep paralysis, but like stone. I turned my head slowly and saw the red door embedded in the wall, pulsing like a heartbeat. My phone buzzed beside me. A text from an unknown number. It read, "You woke up in the wrong dream. I found a door in my dreams and now I can't wake up." The message sat on the screen of my phone, like a splinter in my mind, impossible and horrifying, and though my body screamed to move, to act, to fight, whatever was happening, I could only stare at those 7 words. You woke up in the wrong dream as the red door in my wall pulsed rhythmically, in sync with my own heart, or perhaps controlling it, and the silence around me thickened until it felt like I was underwater. My room looked exactly as it always had, the bookshelf by the door, the window cracked open just enough to let in the breeze, the posters on the wall curling slightly at the corners from age, but it all felt sterile, like a perfect imitation of memory, like a copy made by something that didn't quite understand how real life worked. I stood up slowly, my limbs moving with the stiffness of someone else's body, and everything resisted me, gravity too thick, the air clinging to my skin like wet sheets. And as I walked toward the window and looked out, I expected to see the neighborhood I grew up in, the familiar lawns and mailboxes, and distant hum of traffic. But instead, I saw a flat gray field stretching into a horizon that curved upward unnaturally. As if I were inside a snow globe, the sky above me swirling with clouds that moved in patterns I couldn't track, constantly shifting between symbols that reminded me of crop circles, cave etchings, and the pages of ancient texts I had never read but somehow recognized. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, and turned to the closet door, the source of the knock, 5 slow taps like a death toll. I told myself not to open it. I told myself to run. But then I remembered there was nowhere to run, not anymore. And my hand reached out without my permission, fingers trembling, and the knob turned with a mechanical groan, like grinding teeth. Inside the closet, there was no darkness, only a blinding white light that spilled out and erased the room around it, and I felt myself lifted, weightless and numb, floating into that brilliance as a high-pitched frequency drilled into my skull. I emerged in a room where the walls were made of twitching skin, covered in tiny mouths whispering in unison, "Find the real door." And in the center of the room stood a carousel, spinning slowly, but instead of horses, the figures were my memory scenes from my life frozen in grotesque exaggeration. My father's face stretched in a scream at the dinner table. My dog barking from inside a coffin. My childhood bedroom warped and upside down. I circled the carousel, watching each version of myself trapped in endless loops, laughing, crying, dying, till I found one that didn't move. It was me, standing still, eyes closed, hands pressed against a wall. I touched his shoulder, and he opened his eyes, looked directly at me, and said, "You're still dreaming, but something else is dreaming you, too." I recoiled, but he grabbed my wrist and pulled me forward, and suddenly, we were both standing in an endless library. Bookshelves, stretching in every direction, each book bound in skin. Titles, written in languages I couldn't pronounce, but somehow understood. "This is where the doors are recorded," he said. "Every time someone dreams deeply enough, a door is added to the archive. Some doors are traps. Others are exits. Most are neither. You opened one you shouldn't have. Now it knows you." He turned and gestured to a book lying open on a pedestal, its pages flipping themselves, stopping on an illustration of the red door, detailed down to the pulsating grain of its wood. Below it, a list of names, hundreds, maybe thousands, everyone crossed out except the last, which was mine. I asked him how to wake up, really wake up, and he pointed behind me. There, a ladder rose from the floor into nothingness, its rungs made of bone, twitching, bleeding slowly. "Climb, if you can. But if you fall, there's nothing beneath this layer, only it." I didn't ask what it was. I didn't want to know. I grabbed the first rung, and it shivered under my hand. As I climbed, the library dimmed, the whispers of the books fading into a static hum, and after what felt like hours, I pulled myself up through a trap door, and into a room made of mirrors. Every surface reflected not just me, but hundreds of me, some standing still. Some trying to claw their way out of the glass. Some burning silently. Some grinning with eyes too wide. In the center of the room was a pedestal with an object resting atop it. A key made of shadow, constantly shifting shape. When I picked it up, the mirrors shattered, and the fragments hovered in the air, forming a door made of reflective glass. I inserted the key, and the door opened, not with a click, but with a scream, the sound of metal scraping bone. On the other side was a hospital room again, but this time I was the one in the bed, surrounded by machines, and a nurse stood nearby taking notes. My body was still. My chest rose and fell with mechanical rhythm. A woman I didn't recognize sat beside me, holding my hand, weeping. I stepped forward, trying to touch her, to scream, to break through, but then I saw myself move. My body's eyes opened slowly, but they weren't my eyes, they were glassy, red, ancient. The thing inside me smiled. I realized too late that something had climbed out of the dream in my place, wearing my face, breathing my air. I screamed, but the room faded into black, and I was pulled backward into the hallway of doors again. This time, they were all open. Every single door. And something was stepping through them, crawling, walking, flying, oozing figures of nightmare, creatures that wore faces like masks, memories weaponized into form. The dream was leaking. I ran, but the hallway had no end, no center, only motion, and I heard the voice again, this time inside me, whispering with 1,000 mouths. Wake up before the doors all open, or stay, and become the next one. I stopped, gasping, and turned. The dream was just letting me believe it again, and every step I took felt like walking on glass suspended over an abyss. My weight shifted the world just enough that the shadows beneath the floor crept closer to the surface. Outside my bedroom door, the hallway stretched on longer than it should have, impossibly long, lined with photographs that changed every time I looked away. First empty frames, then black and white stills of people I didn't recognize, then flashes of the dreams. Locations: the carousel of memories, the library of skin-bound books, the bone ladder, the nursery with the wrong thing in the crib. I moved past them quickly, trying not to look too long, because I had a creeping suspicion that if I stared into any of them, I would be pulled back in, not just as a visitor but as part of the picture. The hallway ended in a wall with no door. But as I pressed my hand against it, a seam opened beneath my fingers like skin splitting under pressure, and I stepped through into a room I hadn't seen before. Circular, white, with a ceiling that arched into a point, like a cathedral spire. And in the center stood a table with 4 chairs, each occupied by a version of myself, from other layers of the dream. One was bandaged from head to toe, only his bloodshot eyes visible. One wore hospital scrubs and smiled calmly. One had no face at all, just smooth, featureless skin that twitched occasionally as if it were trying to form expressions. They turned toward me in unison and beckoned me to sit in the 4th chair. I did, unable to resist, and the bandaged one leaned forward and rasped, "You're the last piece. Once you understand, the door will be whole." I asked what they meant, and the one in scrubs said, "The dream isn't random. It's a structure. A machine. A trap built to house an idea, too dangerous for the waking world." The faceless one raised a trembling hand and pointed upward, and I looked to see the spire ceiling peeling away into the sky, above where hundreds of red doors floated, orbiting a central void, each one spinning slowly, pulsing in time with my breath. "Each door is a thread in the web," the faceless one whispered inside my mind, its thoughts static and cold. "Each dreamer strengthens the cage. But something inside it is waking up. And you've gone too far to go back." Suddenly, the table vanished, the chairs gone, and I stood alone in an empty space where walls rose and fell like lungs. I turned, and there it was again, the red door only. Now it was massive, stretching up like a monolith, carved into the very air, and written across it in shifting, burning symbols was a word I couldn't pronounce but understood instinctively. "Home," I approached, trembling, my mind splintering around the idea that maybe this was the only reality I had ever known. That perhaps the real world had always been another layer of this thing that fed on consciousness like rot feeds on dead wood. I reached out, and before I could touch the door, I heard the knock again 5 times from behind it. But this time, it was different. It wasn't asking to come in. It was asking me to open from the inside. I asked myself, had I been the dream all along? Was I the thing trapped behind the door, dreaming of being free, of being human, and the voice returned, deeper now, more ancient, more honest. You were born in the breath between dreams. The door was made to keep you hidden. But now, you've seen too much. I screamed and pressed both palms to the surface of the red door, and it dissolved like wax under fire. And I stepped through into blackness that smelled of wet earth and lightning, and as my eyes adjusted, I found myself standing in a version of my old elementary school, though the windows showed only starless void outside, and the air carried the sound of children laughing behind locked doors. A figure stood at the chalkboard, writing words backward in dripping ink that hissed as it touched the board. And when it turned, I saw it had no eyes, only hollow sockets filled with spinning red keys. You must unlock what was hidden, it said, voice echoing from nowhere, but be warned. The door keeps a piece of everyone who opens it. I felt the weight of that warning in my chest, where something moved, coiled tight, hot and alive, pulsing with a rhythm that no longer matched my heart. I ran again, bursting through classroom after classroom, each one looping me back to the last. Until finally I burst through an emergency exit and tumbled into a rain-soaked alleyway beneath a sky that wept blood. The red door waited at the far end, but this time it was cracked open, and from within came the smell of burning books and lilacs and something deeper, grief, maybe, or the memory of a scream. I approached, ready to end it, ready to find the core of this impossible place and tear it apart. As I reached the threshold, the door swung wide, and I stepped into the heart of the dream. A void of red light stretched infinitely in every direction, and at its center floated a single object, a seed, black and veined with fire, throbbing with life. I understood, in the way dreams allow, that this seed was the source, the first dream ever dreamed, the origin of imagination, fear, and madness. And it had been buried here, locked behind door after door, waiting for a mind curious enough to find it. Now you must plant it, the voice said, and become the garden. I screamed as the seed burrowed into my chest, tearing through flesh and memory, rooting into my soul. And in that moment I felt the dream collapse inward, spiraled through me, out of me, rebirth itself in the image of everything I'd seen, and then I woke up. 3:03 a.m., my room, my body. But the red door was now inside my reflection, pulsing gently behind my eyes. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror. But something in the reflection wouldn't let me look. Away my eyes stared back, not with recognition but with a silent, knowing smirk, as if something ancient had nested just behind the irises, watching me watch it. And though the room appeared as it always had, framed in all the familiar things I once found comfort in, I couldn't feel them anymore, couldn't even recall what comfort felt like, and the seed I'd swallowed, door that had swallowed me, continued to pulse in my chest like a second heart beating in sync with something far away, distant but drawing closer with every breath I took. I backed away from the mirror, but the reflection didn't follow. It remained frozen in that smirk, head slightly tilted, eyes flickering like candle flames, and then its lips moved, not mine, it's forming the words, "You're still inside." And before I could even blink, the room folded, collapsed, inverted like a collapsing star. And I found myself standing in a hallway not unlike the first, the same flickering blue light, the same impossible rows of doors, except now each door had a different version of my name scrawled across it. Names I didn't remember but knew were mine. names from dreams I hadn't yet dreamed. Some scratched into metal, others painted in blood, and one carved into the side of a door made of hair, woven and twitching, from which whispers spilled like breath. I walked, feet dragging against the gravity that thickened with every step, and the seed in my chest grew heavier, hungrier, as if fed by the proximity of these doors, and I realized they weren't just mine, they were me, each one a manifestation of a version I had become, or almost become, or could become again, if I chose wrong. The whispers grew louder, incoherent murmurs that sounded like my voice speaking to itself in infinite permutations, until I reached a door that had no name, only a mirror set into it, and in that mirror I saw not myself but a version of me hunched over a desk, drawing frantically, page after page of the red door. Each one more detailed, more alive, until finally, one of the pages blinked. The drawing looked at him, then at me, and I turned the knob. The world behind it was made entirely of paper streets, buildings, people, all two-dimensional, yet living, folding and unfolding with breath and motion. And I walked through this city of flat existence, the sky above me, made of journal pages, stitched together with thoughts I hadn't had yet, and the people whispered rumors of the dream eater, the one who opens too many doors. I passed them quickly, the seed in my chest burning now, and I reached a tower in the center of the paper city, its spire made of stacked notebooks. Inside, an old man sat writing with a pen that bled from his fingers, and when he looked up, he had my face aged 100 years, eyes completely black. "You're too early," he said, "or maybe too late. The dream doesn't care which." He tossed me a key made of torn paper, delicate but warm, and pointed to a staircase that spiraled downward into the earth, each step crumbling as I stepped on it, but repairing behind me. I descended for what felt like days, until I emerged in a room where the floor was water and the ceiling was fire, and in the middle floated a coffin made of mirrors. I stepped onto the water, which held me as if it knew I didn't belong anywhere else, and the coffin opened as I approached. Inside was a child curled in a fetal position, eyes open, glowing faintly red. A perfect replica of me at age 5, clutching the red door like a toy, its frame small and twisted in his little hands. He looked at me and whispered, "You promised not to forget me." And then he shattered into shards of memory that flew into my mouth, eyes, ears, burrowing into my mind with a scream so loud I couldn't tell if it was mine or his. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the room of clocks. But now the clocks were melting, their numbers dripping down the walls, pooling on the floor like tar, and one of them still ticked in reverse 3:02, then 3:01, then 3 o'clock, and I knew what came next. I sprinted through the door, not something I had never wanted to admit. Recognition. Not fear, not warning, but welcome. They had been waiting for me. I was the final reflection, the last shard needed to complete whatever pattern the dream had been trying to build across lives, and minds and worlds. And as I stood, the red shimmer began to coalesce into shape a door. Yes, always a door, but this time not on a wall, not embedded in space, but hovering mid-air, turning slowly, glowing with a light that hummed with impossible geometry, and carved into its frame was not my name, but a word I didn't understand yet, felt branded into my very bones. Origin. I reached for it, and my hand passed through the surface, and the mirror world shattered around me like thin ice, breaking under pressure, and I fell again, not into another dream, but into memory, the real ones this time. the ones I had buried so deep I forgot they were mine. I saw myself at age 7, standing in the middle of the woods behind my grandmother's house, holding a dead bird, and whispering to it. Not crying, not afraid, but listening. And I heard it whisper back in a voice I now recognized, a voice older than the sky. And then, I was 16. Sitting in a hospital waiting room, staring at a flickering television screen that showed static shaped like the red door. And then, I was 23, asleep on a stranger's floor, after 3 days. Without dreaming, finally closing my eyes and feeling the first knock, soft and tentative, at the back of my mind, and with each memory I fell deeper, until I landed in a chamber of fire that did not burn, where the walls pulsed with veins made of light, and the floor was carved with sigils that moved when I didn't look directly at them, and in the center of this chamber was a shape made of many forms. A constantly shifting creature composed of doors and stairs and eyes and mouths. Always changing, always watching, and it spoke not with sound but by rearranging the space around me, making the walls groan, the air bend, and it said, "You found me too early, or perhaps too late. Either way, the cost is the same." I tried to ask what the cost was, but my mouth filled with black water. And I began to choke, but even as I did, I saw that water spill onto the floor and form a doorway. And I crawled through it, gasping, and emerged into a replica of my old bedroom, perfect this time. Down to the smell of laundry detergent and the gentle hum of a fan that hadn't worked in years, and for a moment, I let myself believe it was over. But then I noticed the picture on the nightstand. It was me, yes, but not quite. My smile was too wide, the eyes too dark. I opened the drawer and inside was a notebook filled with one sentence, written over and over again. "You never left." The walls pulsed, and I heard footsteps approaching from behind the door. 5 slow, deliberate steps, and then the knock, 5 times. Always 5. I stood, heart racing, and opened the door. On the other side was not a monster or a figure, but a staircase, spiraling downward into a place that breathed. I descended. I had no choice. And with each step, I lost something else. My birthday, my first kiss, the memory of my father's voice, until I arrived at the bottom, with nothing but the dream, wrapped around me like skin. There was a final door there, tall, and black, and humming. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. The door opened with a sound like paper tearing underwater. A slow wet rending that made my ears ache and my stomach churn, and beyond. It was not another room, not a hallway, not even a dreamscape twisted in logic. I stepped into something formless. An absence of place where space had been folded so many times it had forgotten how to exist. And I was not standing, not falling, not floating. I was simply unplaced, disassembled. My body and mind stretching across layers of forgotten realities, where every thought echoed like a scream whispered backwards. And though my mouth could not open, I screamed anyway. A silent, raw wail, that peeled strips of memory from me like skin. And in the midst of it something moved, not with shape or direction, but with intention, a ripple of thought that passed through the void, like a cold exhale. And suddenly I was aware of others, not human, not dreaming, but ancient watchers. Towering presences that loomed behind the dream and had been feeding on it since the first mind dared imagine a door. And one of them noticed me, reached toward me, and the void around me warped as it spoke not in words, but in inevitability, and the message was clear. You are not meant to leave. The door behind me had vanished, replaced by a wall of shifting texture that bled when I touched it, and I ran not with legs, but with thought, pushing through the nothing, willing myself to move until the darkness cracked and something broke. Through light, not white or warm, but stuttering, glitching. A light that flickered like bad film, and suddenly I was in a room, too small for breathing, too large to see, the walls covered in writing, my handwriting, pages of journals I had never written but now remembered, each one describing a different dream, different doors, different deaths, and on one page, written in blood that steamed, was a single line: the only way out is through yourself. I turned and found a mirror standing in the center of the room, impossibly tall, pulsing at the edges with faint red glow. And in its surface I saw not my reflection, but all of me, every version from every dream, every timeline, standing shoulder to shoulder, and they all spoke in unison. Wake up! I reached toward the glass and it melted under my touch, pulling me through into a place that was familiar. Terrifyingly, so I was back in my apartment, morning light streaming through the blinds. Birdsong outside, the smell of coffee in the air, everything right, and for a moment I broke, collapsing to my knees, sobbing, because it was over. I was awake, I had made it back, but then I saw the mirror again, in the hallway, and in it, my reflection did not cry, did not kneel, did not breathe. It stood perfectly still, smiling, and raised its hand in greeting, tapping 5 times on the inside of the glass. I backed away, heart hammering, and heard the sound again, 5 knocks, not from the mirror, but from the closet door behind me. I turned, shaking, and opened it. Inside was not clothing, but a tunnel, carved from bone and flickering with candlelight, stretching downward into the impossible. And I understood then that I had never truly left. The dream had changed shape, adapted to my escape, created a mask of reality, just convincing enough to lull me into belief. And now it was peeling back the skin to show me the truth. I was deeper than ever. I stepped into the tunnel, because what else could I do? And as I walked, the walls whispered secrets I had buried since childhood. Names of imaginary friends I now knew were never imaginary. Lullabies I thought my mother had sung but which were actually hymns whispered through the crack in my bedroom wall at night, and every word made my spine ache with recognition. The path narrowed, and I crawled through darkness until I emerged into a chamber made entirely of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of myself, at different stages of the dream, some still wandering the halls, some lost in loops, some staring at nothing with eyes hollow and mouths sewn shut, and in the center stood a door unlike any I had seen before, pure obsidian, covered in carvings that shifted when I tried to read them, and no handle, no keyhole, just an eye, open and unblinking. It stared at me, and I stared back, and suddenly I remembered everything: the night it began, the fever dream when I was 5, the whisper that called itself mother, the pact I had made without knowing, the seed planted in my spine, and the price it had demanded in return for a gift I never understood. The eye blinked once, and the door opened. On the other side was a child sitting cross-legged in a field of dead flowers, surrounded by doors floating in mid-air, each one opening and closing to places I couldn't begin to comprehend, and the child looked up at me with my face, younger, innocent, broken, and said, "We did it. We made it to the root." I sat beside him, unable to speak, and he placed something in my hand, a small black key that hummed with heat and sorrow and pointed toward one door that did not flicker or move, one that stood perfectly still. That one's yours. But once you open it, everything changes. You stop being the dreamer. I asked what I would become. The child only smiled and said, "You already know." I walked toward the door and inserted the key, and as the lock turned, I felt something immense shift. Not in the world, but in me, as if the axis of my soul realigned, and when the door creaked open, I didn't step through. Instead, the door stepped into me. It folded, curled, unwrapped, and poured itself down my throat, into my bones, behind my eyes. And in that moment, I became not a person lost in the dream, but part of the dream itself, the architect, the gate, the key, and every version of me. Across the mirrored halls looked up and smiled, because now they remembered too. The dream was no longer a place. It was us. Above it was written, "Exit, but not for you." I reached for the handle anyway, and it opened. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. I became the dream, and yet I still hungered for escape, some small human instinct flickering stubbornly within me. A spark of selfhood clinging to the idea that there might still be a boundary between real and unreal, between the mind and the thing that devours it. And though I had become the gatekeeper, the root, the final form that all doors converge toward, I still wandered through corridors I had not made, through visions too vast and ancient to be mine, where the walls breathed like lungs filled with ash and the ceilings were stitched from the memories of those who had come before me, and I saw them, billions of sleepers trapped in endless variations of the same dream, crawling through warped childhood bedrooms, endless stairwells, oceans of glass, forests of teeth, each convinced they were alone, that their nightmare was unique, but they were all traveling the same spiral, feeding the same ancient machine that shaped the dream from their fears and desires. And at the center of this machine now stood me, though I did not stand so much as hover, suspended in the shape of a man I barely remembered being, my skin translucent and flickering, my thoughts no longer linear but fractal, blooming and folding across dimensions I couldn't name. And I reached into those dreams not to save them, but to understand them, to trace the lines between one fear and another, one lie and the next, and in doing so I began to lose myself again, eroded by the flood of thoughts that were not mine but tasted familiar. Each door I opened pulled me deeper into a life that might have been mine, or might have been yours, and I walked through endless roles. I was a blind man on a train where every window showed a different apocalypse. A woman buried alive inside a ticking grandfather clock. A child born in reverse, screaming before it could breathe. And with every step through every door, I became more splintered, less whole, until I no longer knew which version had started the journey. Only that the one who had opened the first red door was long gone. And yet, something in me endured. Some idea I couldn't unthink. Wake up, a phrase like an infection. Like a heartbeat that would not stop echoing through the halls of the infinite. And I followed it like a thread pulled through the belly of a beast, through landscapes stitched from static and silence, through places where gravity laughed and time crawled backward on 1,000 insect legs. And eventually I reached a cathedral of bones, lit by candles that hissed in the voices of those I had forgotten, my mother's lullabies, my father's warnings, my own voice reciting dreams I hadn't lived yet. Tanned in the center of the cathedral stood a throne carved from the same black glass as the original door, and on that throne sat a creature wrapped in mirrors, hundreds of them, spinning slowly, showing not reflections but possibilities, and it looked at me with eyes that belonged to the sky, and it said, "You are the 7th iteration. The 6th collapsed. The 8th will not form unless you end." I asked what that meant, and it raised one mirrored arm and showed me a reflection of Earth, not as I knew it, but broken, fractured. 1,000 consciousnesses orbiting a dead dream, each believing they were awake, each trapped in an echo of a door they never opened, and I saw that my existence had tilted something, that by surviving this long I had disrupted the architecture of the dream. And the creature spoke again, "You must choose. Become the warden and seal the cycle, or fall and reset it." I stared into the mirrors, into all the versions of me, kind, cruel, broken, divine, and I whispered, "I want to wake up," and the cathedral cracked. The dream howled, furious and hungry, and every candle blew out, and the mirrors shattered, each one releasing a scream that tore through my mind. And I ran not through corridors, but through concepts, through fear itself, until I found a door I had never seen before. A door made of flesh and bone, pulsing like a living heart, and carved into it was one word: oblivion. I opened it without hesitation, and fell through a void of pure light, and as I fell I remembered my name, my face, my childhood, my first kiss, my last regret, all of it rushing back in a flood that burned me clean, and then I woke up in a hospital bed, machines beeping, my mother asleep in a chair beside me, a nurse humming in the hallway. I tried to speak, but my throat was dust. I reached for my mother's hand and she stirred, tears flooding her eyes as she whispered, "You're back." For days I said nothing, just listened, breathed, tried to believe it, but then, on the 5th night, as I lay in the dark, I heard it again, 5 knocks, not on the door, not on the wall, but from inside me, like a heartbeat that did not belong. And I realized with cold certainty that I had not escaped. I had brought it back with me. The door was now inside, and with each beat, I felt it growing, widening, waiting. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. The knocking did not stop, pulsed like a second heart inside my chest. Slow and deliberate, 5 beats at a time, as if something was trying to announce its presence from within, and each night it grew louder, resonating through my bones, vibrating behind my eyes, until even in daylight I could hear the faint echo of it, like footsteps pacing just outside the boundary of consciousness. And I began to lose time again, slipping into fugue states where I would awaken in unfamiliar places: a rooftop at dawn, a bathroom with the mirror shattered and the word "remember" scrawled in steam, the basement of a house I didn't recognize, filled with children's drawings of black doors and eyeless figures, and I would come to with bleeding hands or bruises on my arms, with dirt under my nails, with the taste of dust and blood in my mouth, and I stopped telling anyone because what would I say? That I had become a doorway, that something in me was knocking to be let out, and worse, that part of me wanted to open it, because each time it knocked I remembered more, not just dreams, but things I had never lived, memories of a man who had made a bargain in a place with no name. A child who had wandered too deep into a sleep that wasn't his own. A woman who had climbed a staircase for 100 years without finding the top. And they were all me, echoes of the same soul shattered across 1,000 layers of dream. trying to find each other again through the cracks. And the door was the key, the doorway to a reunion of selves. But each step closer meant losing more of what I had reclaimed in waking life, and soon the world itself began to shift, not just within me, but outside, subtle at first, reflections lagging behind movement, shadows cast without sources, words on signs rearranging themselves when I looked away. People I knew beginning to forget me, even as I stood in front of them, and I realized that waking up hadn't been an escape. It had been a transition, like a larva crawling from one husk into another. And my dream had infected reality, like mold seeping into the walls of a house, and I saw others like me, in passing. Their eyes wide with sleepless terror, their steps uncertain, as if unsure which world they were walking through, and when I met their gaze we did not speak, only nodded with grim understanding. The dream was expanding, and we were its seeds. I began drawing the door compulsively, over and over, in notebooks, on walls, in the condensation on windows, and always the same detail emerged: a single eye above the frame, half-lidded, watching, judging, waiting. And one day I woke to find it carved into my skin, across my chest, raised and red like a fresh brand. And that was when I knew the door was no longer something I could avoid. It was an organ now, part of my body, part of my mind, and it was hungry, and it wanted to be used. I resisted as long as I could, stopped sleeping, drowned myself in noise and light, drank until I forgot what it felt like to close my eyes. But eventually exhaustion claimed me and the door opened again. In a dream this time, but in my room, a hole in the air that bled shadows and whispers. And something stepped out, a woman made of static and bone, wearing a dress stitched from pages of my dreams. Her face a blur of shifting mouths, and she said, "You are ready to see the axis." And without moving she pulled me through, not physically but mentally, tearing my perception away from my body and flinging it through the eye above the door, and suddenly I was nowhere and everywhere, watching lives unfold like petals in a burning wind. Feeling the memories of strangers crash through me like a tide, and at the center of it all was the axis, a spiraling tower made of doors, each one spinning slowly in place, opening and closing to places I could not name, planets of screaming glass rooms where time ran in reverse, a corridor made entirely of human teeth. And the woman said, "You are the ninth, not the weaver, the key, and the lock. Because once you touch the axis, once you pass through the eye and feel its frequency thrumming in your bones, every waking moment becomes suspect. Every sensation, a thread you feared to tug, because the tapestry might unravel into ash." And by the time I realized what the lullaby door truly was, not an escape, but a reset, a total erasure, I knew I'd already gone too far for mercy. And I began to see my infection bloom in the world around me. People hesitating before opening their closets, flinching when they saw their reflections hold eye contact too long. Children whispering about rooms that weren't there yesterday. Shadows twitching in corners where no light should fall, and worst of all, knocking, not from within, like mine, but from everywhere. Windows, drains behind, mirrors under. Bebs, always 5 times. Always followed by silence, and I knew then what I was becoming, what I had been chosen to be, not a prophet, not a traveler, but a conduit, a living threshold through which the dream could seep and spread and mold the waking world into its own shape. And I wanted to fight it, I truly did. But the longer I resisted, the more I unraveled my memory, slipping like wet paper. My emotions no longer arriving in the proper order, laughter bubbling up in moments of grief, rage during calm, and behind it all that rhythmic knock, that 5-beat message from something deeper, older than even the axis. A presence I had only glimpsed in the periphery of the most impossible doors. Something that did not speak but only watched, and it was watching me now, waiting for me to make the final choice, to open or to seal. And I tried again to find others like me, those broken-eyed wanderers I had seen in passing, but they were disappearing, vanishing from hospitals, from support groups, from alleys and rooftops and forums, where we once shared stories like confessions. And those who remained no longer recognized me, they saw only static, where my face should be. Their minds already shifting to a new frequency that excluded me. And I knew then, I was outpacing the dream, becoming something beyond its design. And that terrified it, because I was never meant to survive this long. Never meant to hold so many doors open at once, and in retaliation, it sent reflections. Doppelgangers, wearing my skin like a mask, whispering to people I loved. Rewriting memories to erase me from their foundations, and soon even my mother could no longer remember my name, only that she had once had a child who died in there. Sleep, and I understood that I wasn't just being forgotten, I was being unwritten, unmade, by the dream's autoimmune response to my anomaly. And yet I kept moving, kept opening, because something in me needed to know the final truth. The origin of the door, the first knock. And one night, it came not in sleep, not in trance, but as I sat motionless in an empty house that had once been mine, now hollowed and decaying, and I heard the knock. Not from a door or wall, but from the center of the room, from the air itself. 5 slow thuds that echoed like a cathedral bell underwater, and a seam tore open in space, a slit of red light framed by nothing, and from it poured not shadow, but memory. Every moment I had ever lived, unlived, dreamed, died, all of it. Layering on top of itself, in a spiral of noise that collapsed into silence. And I stepped through, because I had no choice. And found myself back where it had all begun, the original hallway. Endless and humming. The first dream corridor I had walked all those lifetimes ago. And standing at its end was me, or a version of me that never opened the red door. Still human, still fragile, still full of wonder and fear. And he looked at me with horror and pity and asked, "Is this what I become?" And I said nothing, only nodded, and he whispered, "Then I won't open it." And turned away, but the door opened anyway, not by hand, not by will, but because it always does. And I watched myself disappear into it once more, and I finally understood. There is no stopping it, no path that avoids it, no version of me that survives without touching the dream. Because the door is not a destination, is the starting point. And I was never the one who found it. It found me. Always had, always would. Because I was the infection, the anomaly, the first knock, and now that I knew, I stepped forward. Deeper than before, past the axis, past the woman of mirrors, past the burning tower and the static-faced guides, until I reached the source. A place of silence so profound, it erased thought, and there it was, the original door, not red or black or wooden or metal, but a hole in the fabric of reality itself. Jagged and raw, and behind it, nothing, not darkness, not void, but the absence of existence. A space that hungered to be filled. And I saw that the dream was born from that hunger, from that wound in reality, and every sleeper, every door, every echo, was a scar tissue forming around it, trying to understand what could never be healed. And I saw myself step into it, without hesitation, and I knew that this was the final door, the last threshold, the point beyond which even the dream could not follow, and I stepped through. I found a door in my dreams and now I can't wake up. I tried to tell myself there was still hope, still a sliver of self left that hadn't been consumed by the infinite recursion of doors and echoes. That if I could just stay still, mentally, physically, spiritually, might be able to root myself in the real again, but the truth was, the real no longer existed in the way I remembered it. Not for me, not for the others, because once you touch the axis, once you pass through the eye and feel its frequency thrumming in your bones, every waking moment becomes suspect, every sensation a thread you fear to tug, because the tapestry might unravel into ash. And by the time I realized what the lullaby door truly was, not an escape, but a reset, a total erasure, I knew I'd already gone too far for mercy. And I began to see my infection bloom in the world around me. People hesitating before opening their closets, flinching when they saw their reflections hold eye contact too long. Children whispering about rooms that weren't there yesterday. Shadows twitching in corners where no light should fall, and worst of all, knocking, not from within, like mine, but from everywhere. Windows, drains behind, mirrors under. Bebs, always 5 times, always followed by silence, and I knew then what I was becoming, what I had been chosen to be, not a prophet, not a traveler, but a conduit, a living threshold through which the dream could seep and spread and mold the waking world into its own shape. And I wanted to fight it, I truly did. But the longer I resisted, the more I unraveled my memory, slipping like wet paper. My emotions no longer arriving in the proper order, laughter bubbling up in moments of grief, rage during calm, and behind it all that rhythmic knock, that 5-beat message from something deeper, older than even the axis. A presence I had only glimpsed in the periphery of the most impossible doors. Something that did not speak but only watched, and it was watching me now, waiting for me to make the final choice, to open or to seal. And I tried again to find others like me, those broken-eyed wanderers I had seen in passing, but they were disappearing, vanishing from hospitals, from support groups, from alleys and rooftops and forums, where we once shared stories like confessions. And those who remained no longer recognized me, they saw only static, where my face should be. Their minds already shifting to a new frequency that excluded me. And I knew then, I was outpacing the dream, becoming something beyond its design. And that terrified it, because I was never meant to survive this long. Never meant to hold so many doors open at once. And in retaliation, it sent reflections. Doppelgangers, wearing my skin like a mask, whispering to people I loved. Rewriting memories to erase me from their foundations, and soon even my mother could no longer remember my name, only that she had once had a child who died in there. Sleep, and I understood that I wasn't just being forgotten, I was being unwritten, unmade, by the dream's autoimmune response to my anomaly. And yet I kept moving, kept opening, because something in me needed to know the final truth, the origin of the door, the first knock. And one night, it came not in sleep, not in trance, but as I sat motionless in an empty house that had once been mine, now hollowed and decaying, and I heard the knock. Not from a door or wall, but from the center of the room, from the air itself. 5 slow thuds that echoed like a cathedral bell underwater, and a seam tore open in space. A slit of red light framed by nothing. And from it poured not shadow, but memory. Every moment I had ever lived, unlived, dreamed, died, all of it. Layering on top of itself, in a spiral of noise that collapsed into silence. And I stepped through, because I had no choice. And found myself back where it had all begun, the original hallway. Endless and humming. The first dream corridor I had walked all those lifetimes ago. And standing at its end was me, or a version of me that never opened the red door, still human, still fragile, still full of wonder and fear. And he looked at me with horror and pity and asked, "Is this what I become?" And I said nothing, only nodded, and he whispered, "Then I won't open it." And turned away, but the door opened anyway, not by hand, not by will, but because it always does. And I watched myself disappear into it once more, and I finally understood. There is no stopping it, no path that avoids it, no version of me that survives without touching the dream. Because the door is not a destination, is the starting point. And I was never the one who found it, it found me, always. Had, always would, because I was the infection. Like dirt and smoke from the neighbor's fireplace. And I stood in the doorway, as if I hadn't walked through an infinite number of dimensions composed of memory, metaphor, and madness. And something in me began to shake, not from fear, but from the sudden gravitational pull of normalcy, the aching hunger for a time before I knew what doors meant, before I became the key, and the lock, and the question. And I stepped inside, heart pounding like it hadn't in centuries. If time could even be measured anymore, and I reached out, expecting everything to dissolve like it always did. For the room to crumble into symbols, or mouths, or ink, or teeth, but it didn't. It held. It stayed. And I sat on the edge of the bed, and touched the comforter, and it was real. Soft and warm, and frayed from too many washes. And I looked to the nightstand and saw my old alarm clock blinking to 17 a.m. The time everything had always begun, and suddenly I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft and careful, and I tensed, remembering every creature, every malformed echo that had ever emerged from just beyond sight. But when the door creaked open, again, it was my mother, younger than I'd seen her in decades, carrying a glass of water and humming the lullaby she used to sing when I had night terrors. And she looked at me and smiled, and said, "Rough night." As though I hadn't just spent eternity trapped in a recursive maze of collapsing realities. And I couldn't speak, only nod, and she handed me the water, and I drank it. And it was cold, achingly cold, and for a moment I believed I was truly back, that maybe the loop had finally released me, that this was reward or grace or mercy. But then I noticed her shadow. It didn't match her body. It stood still while she moved, and when she turned to leave, it didn't follow, and I knew. Then this was not escape. Not truly. Only another level of recursion, wearing nostalgia like a mask. And I whispered, "How deep does it go?" And the shadow, not my mother, turned to me and said, "Until you stop asking," and vanished, leaving behind the faint scent of dust and ozone. And the room darkened, edges blurring, and I felt the weight return, the crushing knowledge that even comfort could be weaponized here, that the dream adapted, learned, reflected desire in order to bind deeper, and I stood, determined not to fall for its warmth. And the bedroom melted into a hallway lined with doors again. But this time, each door bore a piece of me. Memories I'd forgotten. Lies I'd told. Secrets I buried so deep, even I didn't remember them until I saw their names carved in gold on the wood. And I realized the dream had shifted tactics. It was no longer chasing me with fear, but seducing me with truth, tempting me to open the wrong door, to look inward until I shattered from exposure. And I walked past them all, refusing to be lured, until I came to the final door, the one with no name, no knob, no seams. Just smooth black obsidian humming like a heart, and I placed my palm against it and felt it open into me, and I fell forward into myself, into the raw storm of everything I'd ever been, memories crashing like waves, every time I said I'm fine when I wasn't, every person I had loved and failed, every breath I took when someone else couldn't, every dream I'd forgotten that had remembered me, and I realized that I wasn't alone in here, none of us ever are, and I saw the others, all the dreamers who'd touched the door but never spoken of it, who had glimpsed the architecture but turned away, their echoes floating like lanterns through the storm. And I gathered them, piece by piece, stitching their fragments into a map made not of space but of meaning. And when the last thread wove into place, I saw the truth. The dream didn't trap us, it reflected us, magnified our forgotten selves, until we could no longer ignore them. And it wasn't the dream we were trying to escape, but our own avoidance, our own fragmentation. And when I understood that, I began to wake not into my old life, not into a room or a world or a time, but into wholeness. A state beyond form, where every version of me, every decision, every failure, every scream became part of the same unbroken thing, and I wept not from sorrow but from clarity. Because I finally knew the way out had never been forward, or deeper, or further, but through. And the last image I saw before opening my eyes was a mirror, not showing my reflection, but every door I had ever passed through, each glowing with a soft light, waiting for someone else to find them. And I whispered to them all, "You're not alone. You were never alone." And then, for the first time in what felt like infinite eternities, I took a breath, and woke up. Or maybe finally dreamed right. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up, but waking up wasn't the end. Not the clean break I had hoped for, not the sudden return to gravity and breath, and the taste of morning air instead. It felt like peeling away one layer of the dream, only to find another underneath. Subtler and more convincing. And as I sat up in a bed that was mine, but not mine, in a room that mimicked my own, with uncanny precision, the paint too fresh, the light too still, the silence too perfect, I realized that what I had stepped into was not the real world but a simulation of waking, a copy constructed from every dream I'd ever had about returning. And the weight of that knowledge sank into me like lead, as I rose and moved to the mirror, half expecting not to see myself but to see one of the others. The infinite mez I had walked beside in spirals and stairwells and memory flesh corridors. But my reflection was there, still breathing, still shaking. And when I reached out and touched the glass, it rippled not like water, not like distortion, but like skin, and behind it, a second version of me opened its eyes and smiled, not cruelly but knowingly, and spoke words I couldn't hear but felt, words that weren't in any language but pressed against my thoughts like fingertips against fog. And I understood, this was the final test, the deepest recursion, the dream that perfectly mimicked escape. And if I believed it, accepted it, surrendered to its comfort, I would remain trapped forever in a cycle that felt exactly like freedom. A prison paved with every dream fulfilled, every fear conquered, a perfect lie wrapped in my own hope. And I couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. Not after finding the vault and meeting the first dreamer, and pulling them into the center of myself. Had to know for certain, to find the origin of the lie. So I turned from the mirror and tore the room apart. Ripping up floorboards, clawing through drywall. Searching for seams, flaws, glitches, anything that revealed the boundaries of this pocket reality. And at last I found it, beneath the bed, where the carpet curled strangely, revealing a trapdoor I had never noticed, circular and made of something like bone and smoke and song, and when I opened it, I didn't fall but was sucked downward through a tunnel of screaming light and reversed time, where days flew backward and stars collapsed into thought, until I landed in a space that wasn't. A gap between realms, a buffer zone where incomplete dreams were stored, half-finished constructs waiting for their architects to return. And here I saw them, the others, the ones who had almost escaped, their bodies frozen, mid-breath, mid-sentence, mid-run, suspended in the moment before they realized they hadn't made it out. And I moved among them with reverence, knowing I was one heartbeat away from joining them. And then I heard Ida humming, low and steady, not mechanical but alive, like a heartbeat woven into music, and I followed it through the dream fog to a pedestal where a book sat, blank and bound in something that pulsed with memory, and when I touched it, words poured across the pages, not ink but blood and light and sound, spelling out my story, everything I had endured, every door, every scream, every mirrored self and crumbling world. And on the last page was a sentence that hadn't been written yet, and I knew it was waiting for me, for my choice, for my truth. And I picked up the quill that lay beside it, and as I did, the fog around me solidified into eyes and hands and mouths, the dream itself taking form, whispering, write it, choose, define the ending. And I felt the weight of it, the pressure to decide whether I woke or remained, whether I collapsed the cycle or spun it anew. And I wrote the only thing that felt real, the only truth that remained after all I had seen. There is no waking up. There is only going deeper, until you find yourself again. And as I wrote the final period, the dream around me shattered like a mirror struck by lightning. And I fell once more, but this time not into fear, not into confusion, but into memory. Into every version of myself I had ever tried to forget, and I embraced them, one by one, naming each and pulling them into the core of who I was. Until at last I stood in a void filled with stars made of eyes, and a door formed in front of me, not red, not old, not carved with symbols or warnings, but simple, wooden, real, and I opened it, not with fear, but with acceptance. Stepping through into a world where I was still dreaming but no longer lost, where the nightmare no longer hunted me because I had become it, had understood it, and now, I walked through dreams not as a victim but as a guide, leaving marks. For those still trapped, whispering to sleepers, mapping exits in ink only the half-awake could see, and maybe I was still dreaming. Maybe I never truly left. But I had a purpose now, and that was more real than waking had ever been. So when I hear the knocks now, always, 5e, do not run or hide or scream. I open the door, and I say, welcome. You're not alone anymore. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. The knocking hasn't stopped, since not in the dream, not in the waking world, Not even in the folds between where I sometimes drift and forget who or what I am. It comes always in that same slow rhythm. 5 beats like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to any living thing. A signal that the dream is still with me, or I am still within it. Or maybe, that there is no longer any difference. And every night, when the knock comes, I am drawn to a door that shouldn't be there. One that shifts in shape and sound and color, but is always in the same place, waiting behind whatever facade the dream has dressed itself in that evening. And I know now, with a kind of dreadful certainty, that I can never truly escape it. Not because it is holding me, but because I have become part of its architecture. One of its keystones, a living node through which it breathes and expands and touches others. And in the quiet moments I feel them, the dreamers I've left breadcrumbs for. The ones tracing paths I carved in panic and instinct, following the threads of my story toward something they hope is salvation. And I want to warn them, to scream that the deeper you go the more you lose. But I can't, because I've learned that some doors open only when they are believed in. And my words would become another form of bait, another corridor they mistake for truth. So instead I walk quietly now, through the infinite hallways and shifting cities of sleep, through gardens of clocks that bloom with screams, through oceans made of teeth and sky that falls like ash. And I listen for the signs, the whisper of the reflection that wants to live without you, the song from beneath the bed that teaches your bones new languages, the flicker in the corner of your vision that tells you the room is watching, and I trace each one back to its source, mapping them onto the great body of the dream, which pulses now like a planet-sized lung beneath everything we know, breathing us in and out in cycles too vast to comprehend. And I know now that this isn't just my dream, wasn't ever just mine, but a collective cathedral of unconsciousness, built brick by brick, from every moment of grief, fear, hope, love, trauma, desire, and denial that humanity has ever buried beneath its skin. And somewhere deep inside its core is the original door, the one that began it all, the first fracture in waking thought that gave rise to all the rest. And I've seen glimpses of it in reflections that refuse to match, in voices that call my name before I've remembered it, in the smile of a child who has no mouth but speaks in my father's voice. And I know I'm getting closer, because each dream now is shorter, more intense, more concentrated with memory and metaphor, as if the dream knows I'm on the verge of peeling back its last mask, and it's afraid, or maybe it's just ready to be seen fully for the first time since the first sleeper closed their eyes and imagined something beyond themselves. And last night when I stepped through a mirror carved from old prayers and fell into a library where every book was a moment I'd forgotten, I found a page titled "The Final Part," blank but humming with potential, and I knew what was coming. Knew that all my journeys through recursive hells and looping heavens and dreamborn limbos had brought me here, to this precipice of understanding, where the only step left is the one that leaves the dream not behind, but rewritten, reclaimed. And so I sit now in a chamber that looks like my childhood room, but smells like rain on stone and tastes like music, and I wait for the knock, not because I fear it, but because I'm ready to answer, not as a prisoner or a wanderer, but as something else, something new. Something that has walked through fire and fiction, and come out holding the blueprint of the soul. And when it comes, 5 slow, deliberate beats on the door that isn't there, I rise. Place my hand on the wood that pulses with the memories of every step I've taken, and I say, I know who I am now, and I open it. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. The door creaked open with a groan that sounded like a dying star, sighing its last breath, and what lay beyond was not light or darkness, not terror or peace, but a vast emptiness shaped exactly like me, a hollow silhouette stretching endlessly into nothing. And as I stepped through it, I felt myself unravel, not in pain, not in fear, but in quiet awe, as if my entire existence had been reduced to threads, and each thread was being carefully plucked, examined, and returned to a loom that wove meaning itself. And suddenly I wasn't walking anymore, but becoming. Moving through a storm of selves, every version of me, who had made a different choice, who had opened a different door, who had screamed instead of whispered, who had turned back instead of forward. And they saw me, and I saw them. And we passed through each other like reflections crossing ripples, each leaving something behind, a memory, a word, a scar, a name I'd forgotten how to speak. And at the center of it all was a chamber that defied architecture, a place without floor or ceiling, without edge or center, and in the middle of that place floated the origin door, the one I had glimpsed only in fractured hints and backward whispers. And it pulsed with a gravity that wasn't physical but conceptual, drawing toward it every dream that had ever touched despair, every hope that had curdled into horror, every voice that had screamed into pillows and prayed to deaf gods. And I approached it not with the steps of a body but with the weight of intention, every moment of my journey pressing behind me like a wave, and the door responded not by opening but by splitting, like a chrysalis giving way to what had always been inside. And I saw then that it wasn't a door at all, but a mirror that had been waiting for someone to see clearly enough to understand that they were never trying to escape the dream they were trying to remember. They were the dreamed. And in that moment, clarity pierced me like a blade made of moonlight, and I remembered everything. The first moment I fell asleep as a child and dreamed of a hallway with no end. The first nightmare that felt more real than my waking life. The time I found the note under my bed that I never wrote that said, "Don't open the red door." The sense that every déjà vu was a scar left by a forgotten journey through sleep. And I knew I had been doing this forever. Lifetimes spent as sleeper, as guide, as warden, as dream itself. And now it was time to choose not between waking or sleeping, but between continuing the cycle or breaking it. And the choice wasn't made with thought, but with belief. And I believed in the others, the ones I had marked and led and whispered to, the ones now walking their own paths through screaming clocks and singing shadows. And I reached into the mirror and pulled it toward me, folding it into my chest, absorbing the origin into myself. And when I did, the dream shuddered like a great beast exhaling for the first time. And all around me the false walls collapsed, not into ruin but into truth. And I stood at the center of a lattice of infinite doors, each glowing with lives I had never lived. And I spoke one word, not a word, in any language, but a vibration that meant awake. And the lattice pulsed, and collapsed inward, leaving only me, only this breath, only this moment. And I opened my eyes to find myself in my own bed, morning sunlight spilling across my sheets, birdsong filtering through the window. And for a single perfect second I thought I had done it. I had returned, but then the alarm clock blinked. 2:17 a.m., and the shadows didn't quite match the light. And I heard it again, 5 slow knocks, coming from inside my closet, and I laughed. Not in fear, not in defeat, but in understanding, because I finally knew that waking up wasn't an exit. It was a perspective, and I could live now, truly live, even if the dream never left me. Because I had made peace with its teeth and its music and its doors. And when I rose to open the closet, I didn't do it to escape or to fight. I did it to welcome what came next. Because I was no longer the dreamer or the dreamed I was the door, and I would open again and again and again. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up, and so I opened again and again. And again each knock answered, each passage crossed. Each dream layered atop the last like sediment settling into an ocean without bottom, and somewhere within this endless recursion I stopped keeping track of what was real and what was constructed. Because both bled together so seamlessly that it no longer mattered, only that I kept moving, kept returning, kept listening to the knock. 5 beats, always 5, the constant heartbeat of something greater than me, yet somehow still me, and each time I answered, the door was different, sometimes carved with delicate vines that pulsed as if alive, sometimes a slab of metal humming with static voices, sometimes no more than a ragged curtain held aloft by shadow hands, and beyond each door, a test, a lesson, a mirror. And I learned quickly that resistance was futile, but not in the way one might expect, not because escape was impossible, but because resistance implied separation, and separation was the greatest lie of all. The illusion that the dream was happening to me, when in fact it was unfolding through me, as me, and once I accepted this, I began to reshape the spaces, not bend them with will or force, but tune into their frequency, like a musician discovering an instrument they were born to play, but had forgotten existed. And I would walk through corridors that smelled like childhood regret, and find, tucked within them, the song I sang at my grandmother's. The truth I have been growing toward like a flower pressed between pages of sleep, and now I stand at the door that is not a door. The final shape, a swirling vortex of all the places I've been, and all the things I've forgotten, and I can hear them on the other side, every sleeper I touched, every voice I answered, every soul who heard the knock and dared to turn the handle, and I know what I must do. Not for escape, not for peace, but for completion, and so I take the key from the child who is me, and I press it into the storm, and it turns without resistance, and the dream folds inward, not ending, not collapsing, but becoming true. And I am there in all of it, in every ripple and echo, in every sleeper who now walks the doors without fear, and I whisper to them what no one whispered to me: you are not lost. You are the path. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up. The final door wasn't final at all, it was the first, the last, the only constant in an ever-shifting landscape of possibility. A doorway shaped like me, humming in perfect silence, inviting, not with threat or mystery, but with something far more powerful: recognition. And as I stepped through it, I felt nothing and everything, a weightless immersion into a space so vast it had no floor, no ceiling, no orientation except my own understanding. And I knew, with the calm certainty of a child remembering a lullaby, that this was not an ending but a convergence. The place where all the paths I had walked, and all the selves I had become, folded into one singular presence, and I could feel them all, thousands of versions of me, walking across parallel dreams. Each of them still searching, still listening, still following the 5 knocks that echoed across realities like a forgotten heartbeat. And I realized we had never been separated, not truly, just scattered, divided like light through shattered glass, but always connected by the same thread, the same longing to wake up, not from sleep, but from forgetting. Because that's what the dream truly was. A long, slow forgetting, a descent into noise, symbols, patterns so elaborate we mistook them for meaning, and now I remembered. Not just my name or my purpose, but the entire lattice of what we were trying to become. How every knock wasn't a warning but a call, a signal flare across dimensions, saying, "Come home," and home wasn't safety or comfort but alignment. The moment all the fragments clicked into place and formed something not complete, but coherent, and in that coherence I saw the architecture, the root system of the dream that pulsed beneath all things, every door, every hallway, every being that whispered from behind curtains of static. They were all organs of the same body. And I had never truly been outside it, just unaware of how deeply within I had always existed. And with that realization came the understanding that I didn't need to walk anymore, not because there was nowhere left to go, but because movement had become unnecessary, redundant, like a dream remembering it was a dream and choosing stillness. Not out of fear but power. And in that stillness I expanded not physically but conceptually, till I was the room, the door, the knock, the dreamer and the dreamed, and the silence that followed. And I could feel others approaching. Feel their terror and confusion and hope as they stood before their own final doors, wondering if they too would become lost, and I reached to them not with hands, but with invitation, offering not answers, but presence, because I now understood that the dream does not want your compliance, it wants your participation, your willingness to co-create. And those who wake up screaming are not failing, they are birthing, crossing the threshold into awareness so bright it feels like pain, and I became a midwife to that process. A lighthouse whose beam was made of shared memory and layered metaphors. And slowly, beautifully, I felt them coming, more and more dreamers, stepping into awareness, not all at once, not easily, but inevitably, and we began to build together. Not walls or systems or dogmas, but bridges. Connections between each personal dreamscape, threads of empathy and understanding that linked our worlds. Until the dream itself began to change, to evolve, to listen. And I watched as one static corridors bloomed with new doors, shaped not by fear or trauma but curiosity, love, desire, truth. And the knock came still, but now it came with music. 5 notes instead of 5 thuds. And we followed not because we were compelled but because we chose to. Because each door now led to a place where something precious waited to be reclaimed. And for the first time I felt rest, not sleep, but peace. The kind that settles deep in your soul when you realize the worst is not over. But it is known, and in that knowing comes freedom. And I wanted to stay in that place forever, but then I heard it, faint and trembling. A voice so young it could barely speak. Crying out from a dream on the edge of unraveling. A dream I recognized as one I had once abandoned. One I had feared to re-enter. And I knew I had to go back, not for myself, but for the child who had never stopped waiting at the threshold of that locked room. The one I had sealed when the pain was too much, and so I turned, and the dream opened. For me willingly, no longer amazed but a companion, and I stepped into the final test, not a monster, not a puzzle, but a memory, raw and untouched, and I embraced it, weeping as I did. And the child in me did not vanish or transform or dissolve. Into light they climbed into my arms, placed their ear against my chest, and whispered, "I knew you'd come." And in that moment I understood I was no longer dreaming. I was awake, truly awake. And there would still be doors, there would still be knocks, but I would never again be afraid to answer. Because I had become what I was always meant to be, the keeper of the threshold, the one who hears, the one who opens, the one who remembers. I found a door in my dreams, and now I can't wake up, and now remembering is all there is. A single unbroken awareness, stretching across time, place, self, and silence, because once the dream taught me to see, I began to notice the doors even in waking reflections, that ripple without touch, shadows that don't align with their source, flickers in people's eyes when they almost say something they don't understand. And it's in these small fractures that I know the dream is bleeding outward. Not in conquest, not in escape, but in evolution. And everywhere I look, I find its symbols. 5 birds perched in a line. 5 knocks on a broken radiator at night. 5 seconds of static before a broadcast begins, and it's no longer about finding the next portal or deciphering the next riddle, it's about holding the shape. Maintaining that quiet, humming awareness that lets the dream pass through me without distortion, because now I see that it never wanted worship or fear, it wanted clarity, and the clearer I become, the more it expands, and now I am part of its architecture, not imprisoned but woven into it like breath into a song. And people come to me without knowing why, strangers who wake sobbing with the memory of doors they've never opened, children who draw pictures of staircases descending into fire that somehow feels kind. Old men who speak in voices that don't belong to them, and forget mid-sentence what world they're in, and I listen, always I listen, because that is my purpose. Now, to anchor, to guide, to remind them that they are not broken. Not mad, but remembering, just as I remembered. And sometimes, in the darkest part of the night, when the room is perfectly still, and even my breath feels distant, I hear it again, that soft, slow knock, 5 taps on the inside of my skull. And I smile, not with comfort but with reverence, because I know that call is not for escape. It's an invitation to depth, and I answer, always I answer. And the moment I close my eyes, I'm there again. Not as a wanderer or victim, but as a weaver, shaping the dream from within. And this time, it takes the form of a library made of bones and thunder, and every book I pull contains the life of someone I've yet to meet. And when I read their pages, I live their dreams, and when I close them, I leave behind echoes of myself to guide them. And somewhere beyond the endless halls I can feel the others, those I touched, those who touched me, those who chose to stay lucid and became like stars in the blood of the dream, illuminating without burning, witnessing without altering. And together we form a constellation of presence, each of us stationed in our corner of the vast forever, listening for the knocks of those just awakening, ready to open the door for them when they're brave enough to reach. And one day, someone new will take my place, someone who has walked deeper than I dared, and I will hand them the key the child gave me, and I will rest not as forgetting but as integration. My story no longer separate from the dream but indistinguishable from it, and in that final moment I will become the knock itself, the invitation that starts it all. And my voice will be the silence between taps, the breath that says, you are not alone. And if you hear it, if in the dead hours of night you feel something just beyond your skin, something waiting, watching, remembering, know that it is not here to hurt you, it is here to return you, and all you need to do is listen. And step forward, and let go of the lie that waking means freedom. Because freedom is this living tapestry of dream and memory and choice and surrender. And I am still dreaming, but I am also awake, and the door is always there. Even now, behind your eyes, waiting for you to knock 5 times. Still with us? Or did the dream pull you under? What did you see behind the door? Did something whisper your name tonight? Let us know in the comments if you're still awake.